My project is recreating 21, or also known as Blackjack, with Matlab's GUI function capabilities. Well, this is my project, and this is the main file. All it does is just clears the workspace and the output. And then it calls this function right here, and this function leads to the GUI generated functions file, and it's pretty lengthy. But this is where most of all the GUI stuff is handled, and a good bit of it is automatically generated when you mess with the GUI or call the GUI or guide function. So this first bit, just as it says, is do not edit it, and it's just initializing everything to run in the first place. Although right here, right before the window pops up, I call the start function, which is my defined function. And this is where most things are initialized and generated before before you even see anything. And so it just starts with this, the player starts off with a sum of 0. The dealer gets a random amount from 10 to 20. You can never have 21, so he never wins by default. It sets initial strings and text to some of the boxes within the guide that you'll see later. Then the next function that's called within this function is the load pictures. And as the name implies, it just loads all the pictures into the workspace that may be used during the game runtime. Not all of them are used. Like this one could probably be taken out. It's too lazy. And then after that finishes, then it calls to generate cards. And again, as the name implies, it generates the user's cards. It generates all 4 of them in the beginning. It doesn't generate it as you get your card, or so, pick your card. And so, it just anywhere within this array picks a value, and then that string is what's defined as your card until later. And this is mainly for checking whether or not if you flipped which card, because you have to do sequential flipping. And so after that, the display card, I'm going to go on over one since they're all the same. The only thing that changes is instead of saying the first card, it's like the second, third, or fourth card. The first bit right here changes because in the it needs to check if the previous card has been flipped, and that's what some of those flags were. Just to check that in order to flip the second card, you have to have flipped the first card. And here with that string that was part of your card from the array gets turned into like a numerical value, and so that's how it computes your sum, your total, is it converts that into a numerical value to do the math with. And then the way I handle the A's is as it can be either 1 or 11. The user can't define whether or not they want it as a 1 or 11. It's automatic. And so if it sees when you draw an ace, if you go over 21, it would put it as 1. So you know make sure that you don't go over. And then if you were below, if you would go not under, or if you'd stay below 21 or below 22, it would be 11. So then at the end of this one, it checks that that you've hit the card, or check that the card has been checked, and so that'll be used for other checks. And then right here, these is just again checks for what cards have been flipped. The game state just checks that changes based on if you won or lost. It's just a 1 or 0. And then the title sound, I have other sounds, but don't feel like playing them in any case for copyright. But this one it's me, so just copyright, I guess. And this plays at the beginning, I guess every time you start the game or this function is called. it plays the start sound, which is just, you'll hear it, hopefully. And then all that is within the start function. And then turns out to do functions with the GUI, it's not as simple, but you have to give it all the UI, like handles or variables or so, the way it handles all the object data. You give it that for the function, and you also have, if you modify any of it, and so I did it on every function just in case, but I think specifically if you modify anything, you'd have to like redefine or re-update your handles and your objects and stuff to make sure that what you do carries over. And so back in the main file, that's about that's, that's what happens when you click the run button. The rest of these only come into effect when the corresponding button is hit, and like so, my mouse broke. So this one is the callback for the function callback, I guess, for the first card. So when you flip the first card, this is what gets called, and within this block is what gets executed. And so if you run it, this is the UI the player sees, and so you have a restart button. So if you just want to like restart, you can just hit the restart button and it just reloads the game with a new set of cards. And so it shows the player's amount, and this is how you turn in. So you can either go and hit all the cards or before you lose, or if you only hit like 2 cards and you want to call it, then you just hit turn in, and then it'll, you know, find out whether or not you win or not against the AI. But and so and then the restart button, it just calls the previous file, or just calls the other file, which just calls the project again, and so it just recalls itself and it just runs. It doesn't have any issues with recursion. I haven't noticed it at least. And so I was playing the game a little bit. You hit your card, and all phase cards, which are the jacks, queens, and kings, are all 10, and then 10 is worth 10. And then the other cards, their values, what their number is. And so you hit, and then so you can't hit the fourth card unless the third card is hit, and so it just stops you picking random cards. Just makes it go from left to right, and you can't re-hit the you can re-hit the button, but it doesn't affect the value or the effect of the game. And so if you hit this and you turn in, you'll win, and it gives a little countdown before it resets. And then so you could just try again, and this time we lost. And then if you go, well, if you go all, if you got to mute that. And then if you go over, it automatically takes you as lost. So, and so right there you saw the ace. If you're below, if you would not exceed the 21 or go over 21, it counts as 11. So, and then automatically you lose. And then if you get a tie, it just has a tie. But kind of hard to get that probability. But that's about it for the game. Not too much. And the way you start with the guide, this is what it looks like in the editor, or the figure editor, I guess. And so this box right here isn't shown because I have it hidden, and that was just to show the dealer's amount, so I know whether or not I'd have to check to see if I was actually above or below, or to see how close I was. And the restart button, this all this amount. These are like axes or axes, and you have to individually select these cards before you modify the thing. I think the default goes to the background of the figure. Not exactly what you want, but these 4 cards and these 4 hit buttons are all the same, except at the end of their call, their tag is just the 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's, and then so when you the first time you do it, you bring everything over, and when you hit save, or I guess when you save and exit, it'll generate this type of file with a lot more comments. I just have them deleted, so it adds a lot of redundant comments to kind of explain to some stuff. And so upon the first button, when you hit the button to flip the first card, it switches the axis or the handles to that axis, which is the first card. So whatever happens, you're now locked onto that axis, not everything else. It flips the flag that you hit, you flip the first card, and so then it displays the card 1, which will display the your actual card. It'll update your data, and when they update, it's not that long of a function. It just checks if you're over 21, if you're over 21, you've lost. Or the game's over, I guess. The game will be over. And then it just checks, if the game is over or not over. If the game is still going, then, nothing happens. You still play the game till the next time you call the update data function. But if the game goes to 0, if you're above 20, and then it goes through a series of if statements that check whether or not, if you hit 21, you automatically win, or you've won. And then it checks if you're below 21, and if you're below 21, are you above the AI's amount? And then if you are, then you won by having more than a dollar. If you don't have more than a dollar, then you lost because the dollar had more than you. If y'all have the same, then it's a tie. And if the game's over and you're not above, or if your game's over and you're over 20, then you've lost by just going over. So it doesn't matter what the AI had. And then this updates the good luck box tag, and it just changes the color and the text to show some stuff for other reasons. And then if you're lost, it's in red, as you saw. Greens, or you win, it's in green, and ties in black. And that's pretty similar for all the different card flips. Just some of these values changed for different flags to flip. So this one doesn't have a flag because that's the one you start with, but this flag, this variable has to be 1, which is only flipped or only turned 1 when you flip the first card. So nothing happens if you try to hit the card. It just skips this. And then this also checks if if you've hit the card and you lost, or for some reason, if you lose, if the game ends with you not hitting the 4th card or turning in, then it checks if the game's over, and if it's over, it'll it'll give you the little countdown just to let you know when the game's gonna restart, and then it calls the project, and that's the same as the restart callback, so it just restarts the game for you. This has to be outside of this line for some reason. It just didn't really work, or it would reset, but it would keep all the same data, like all the handles, events, and objects were all the same, so the game didn't. It reset the card, it would show you the face down card, but all the values and data was still there, so nothing really was changed, and the game was broken. So, see, as with card 2, card 3, you have to have flipped card 2, and then its flag is flipped, and then the same thing. This gets instead of having more lines to set the values, I just get the value from the what's currently displayed, and then I just add on to it, and so it makes it nicer or cleaner looking. The way you get that is from the update data. When it changes the text and the color from you lost, if you won, or you tied, these variables get that data, and so the handles.status gets the string, and then the status color gets the color. And so over here, you see that I get the status, and then I add it on this bit, add this on to the current status, and so it just adds it on without having to make a new set that specifically just has this 2 added. When you press the button to turn in, you're quitting, or you're ending the game to check whether or not you win. And so the first thing it does is the game goes to 0, the game's over, and then you call the update data to see if you've won or not, and then based on that, you know you'll win or lose. And it's a similar thing, it just lets you know a little countdown timer before the game restarts. And this 111 is just it's like it's how colors are, at least for this context. It's like an array of colors. So instead of, if you had a color you wanted that's not a predefined color, you just do array. And I think the values are 0 to 1, but